So, moral virtue. What is it? Well, we find that moral virtue, it starts with another puzzle for Aristotle. Everything starts with a puzzle for Aristotle. He asks, is moral virtue an emotion, a capacity to experience an emotion, or what is it? Right? And to illustrate its reasoning process here, it's helpful to think of an example. Let's take an emotion, something like anger. If I'm cut off in traffic, I get angry. Right? The person just cut me off there. I'm going to get angry. Well, of course I'm going to get angry. Right? I don't so much blame myself for getting angry. Right? It's not even the capacity to experience anger that I really blame myself for. What I would blame myself for is swerving my car in front of the guy, forcing him off the road, hopping out, grabbing my 9-iron out of the trunk, and smashing his windshield with it. Right? That would be a blameworthy action. Right? So, a virtue, or a vice for that matter, is something that we praise or blame. We praise virtues, we blame vices. Right? So it's neither an emotion, because we don't praise or blame emotions, nor is it a capacity to experience an emotion, because we don't praise or blame our capacity for anger, for love, for generosity, or for what have you. Right? We don't praise or blame these emotions or emotional capacities. We blame or praise how we act based on them. Right? So Aristotle claims that moral virtue is a habitual disposition to our emotions, resulting in states of character, that is, tendencies to act one way or another. So it's a habitual disposition to our emotions. That is, right, if I'm the kind of person who tends to overreact when he's cut off in traffic, forcing people off the road and smashing their windshields with my 9-iron, right, then what do you call me? A jerk. Right? If I'm the kind of person who gets angry and overreacts every bloody time that he gets angry, I'm a hothead. Right? Whereas, think of it this way. If I'm the kind of person who gets cut off once in traffic and vows never to drive again, you'd call me kind of a wuss, wouldn't you? That would be a problematic attitude. Right? So what he's claiming is these habitual dispositions to our emotions filter through and actually affect how we live our lives in positive or negative ways. A virtue is an appropriate, rational response to our emotions given a situation. A vice is an inappropriate, irrational response to our emotions in a particular situation. Right? And seeing as how these are habits, right? These are habitual dispositions, how do we develop them? No? How do you get to Carnegie Hall? Practice. Right? I experience anger. I overreact. I get into the habit of overreacting. Right? I overreact a number of times, and it becomes perfectly natural for me to overreact. Right? I fear confrontation. It makes me uncomfortable. This is an emotional response. Right? So every time somebody confronts me, I run. I hide in a closet and I cry. This becomes a habit. It becomes a problem. And these problems affect the way that I live my life and the amount of and type of happiness I'm able to achieve in my life. My life is just going to be worse if I develop bad habits rather than good. Right? And these habits are developed through practice, the same way you develop any sort of skill. Here's the thing, I used to be an absolutely horrible public speaker. right? I would get up in front of a class to give a presentation, and I would be stumbling over my words, and it would just be pure agony for me. I wouldn't be able to do it, right? I wouldn't be able to get in front of a room full of people. I wouldn't be able to do one of these videos, right? How did I get better? The same way you develop any sort of skill. Right? I got up in front of groups of people as often as possible and discussed ideas. Right? I talked with people, that sort of thing, until I'm comfortable with a crowd and on an individual basis. Practice. Right? The emotion in that case was fear, the fear of public speaking. So, right, what Aristotle notices about these virtues, a virtue tends to be ruined by extremes. Right? It's surrounded on each side by extreme cases of excess or deficiency. Right? So you take a virtue, right? Let's call it courage. Right? Aristotle uses the example of courage, so let's follow him. And let's take a particular situation. Let's say you're a foot soldier marching up a hill with your company to take the hill from an opposing company. Right? Let's take three kinds of reaction. Right? The first, let's call it an excessive reaction. Right? Rather than marching along with my company, what I do is let out a big battle cry, "Ah!" Right? And go running up the hill. Right? Running up there. Right? What do you think is going to happen in a war situation where I run way ahead of my company, headlong into the danger? Well, we'd call that kind of brash. We'd call that kind of stupid. Right? We'd call that kind of irrational, and what Aristotle would call it is an excessive vice. Right? It's excessive. Right? Whereas, let's say I'm in the same situation, my company's marching up the hill, right? And I decide to hide behind a rock rather than going up there. What would we call that person? A coward. Right? There's danger. I run away. That's cowardly. Right? So courage is that cool-headed, rational, marching along with your company. Right? Not overreacting to the situation, running headlong into it, and not underreacting to the situation and cowering behind a rock. Right? So a virtue is going to be the moderate kind of reaction. Right? And if we think about most of the moral situations that we're in our lives, they're matters of not overreacting, not underreacting, but hitting that appropriate moderate reaction somewhere in the middle there. Right? Our friend upsets us. We don't want to say nothing. We don't want to yell at them, tell them they're jerks and we never want to see them again, but we don't want to say nothing. We want to say the right thing to the right person at the right time. Right? We get cut off in traffic. We want to do the right thing in that situation at that time. Right? We want to exercise caution in the situation, drive defensively, rather than excessively forcing somebody off the highway, or deficiently swearing never to ride on the highway ever again. Right? So it's going to be that mean state. That's the good state. So, moderate actions. That's the idea. Right? Now, I've also said that we develop these virtues by repeating the same sorts of actions over and over and over again. But I want to point out a passage to you on page 22 of your text. Right? But surely actions are not enough, even in the case of these crafts, for it's possible to produce a grammatical result by chance or by following someone else's instructions. To be grammarians, then, we must both produce a grammatical result and produce it grammatically. That is to say, produce it in accord with the grammatical knowledge in us. Okay, it's a weird example. Right? A little bit weird.